CGTN, China Global Television Network. Live from London, this is The World Today.
Hello, I'm Robin Dwyer. Welcome to the programme. Our top stories. Ukraine declares a state of emergency and evacuates people from their homes as it accuses Russia of blowing up a major dam. An outrageous act of aggression. NATO's chief condemns the dam blast as he meets with the alliance's eastern neighbours. Tear gas, flares and skirmishes on the streets of France as protesters stage a new nationwide strike against pension reforms. A state of emergency has been declared in a district of southern Ukraine after a huge dam was destroyed, unleashing a flood of water. Thousands of people are being evacuated from communities around the Nova Kakhovka Dam in the Kherson region. Ukraine and NATO have accused Russia of blowing up the dam, while Moscow has blamed Kyiv. Our correspondent Yolo Abdavid reports.
The Dnipro River is flowing faster after the explosions. Currently, it's an uneasy border for anyone living near the Russian-occupied territory east of the river and Ukrainian control to the west.
After a blast at the Kakhovka Dam, the water flow in the Dnipro River and its tributaries is very powerful. The water level rose by 1 meter. We'll see what happens next, but we hope for the best.
Ukraine's military leaders accuse Russia of blowing up the dam, but Russian officials say it was partly breached because of Ukrainian shelling. In Kyiv, it's serious enough to prompt an emergency national security and defense council meeting.
Russia blew up a major dam located in Nova Kakhovka, causing significant civilians' evacuations, harsh ecological damages, and threatening the safety of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. Russia's actions are the actions of a terrorist state.
Water levels are rising and people are being evacuated from some villages in the region. Upstream, the Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant could be affected. The International Atomic Energy Agency says it's monitoring any potential impact at the nuclear reactors. Internationally, Western diplomats blame Russia. Kremlin-appointed officials locally argue the opposite.
All of this is a result of continuous strikes on the Kakhovka hydroelectric power station. The Ukrainian forces have been carrying out these strikes for a long time. It's obvious repairs are impossible. I think we'll have to rebuild this power station from the start, just like in the 1950s.
An estimated 80 villages could be affected, and Russian officials who control the town of Nova Kakhovka confirm that a part of it is flooded. It's unclear yet how, if at all, this impedes Ukraine's military counter-offensive in the south and the east of the country. Yolo Abdavid, CGTN.
Well, let's head to Moscow now and talk to our correspondent there, Stuart Smith. So, Stuart, what's been the response to this from the Kremlin?
Well, it says that initially this was a Ukrainian attack, an attack designed to do two things. One, to cut off the water supply to Crimea, the annexed peninsula back in 2014, which relies heavily on that reservoir for its water supplies. Now, Moscow has been at pains to stress to the residents of Crimea that it is in no danger of running out of water and that there are backup measures in place. The other thing the Kremlin alleges is that this is part of Ukraine's counter-offensive. The defense minister, Sergei Shoigu, recently saying in the last hour he believes this was an attempt by Ukraine, upon shelling this dam, to allow it to move troops away from the river, where it's intent on making sure Russian forces do not cross over, to other areas of Ukraine in order to undertake a new offensive on a different front, by flooding this area, making it harder for any Russian forces to attempt any kind of crossing. But in the process, we know there are around 10,000, 20,000 residents on each side of the river potentially vulnerable to the flooding, with water still increasing in speed and still increasing in height. Around 1,000 residents have been evacuated from the left bank. That's the side occupied by Russian forces. They'll be moving inland as the river continues to bloat. The local governor suggesting it will be 72 hours potentially before the waters back down to manageable levels.
So, Stuart, people being evacuated from their homes, can you give us any update on that?
Yeah, so the latest we've heard is that the 3 villages closest to the hydroelectric dam have been entirely evacuated, with most of them impossible to navigate and move around. The residents there haven't been told when they will be able to come back, though they are getting support from local authorities who promise they'll be provided with accommodation, food and water. But we know there is panic in other parts of Ukraine, including in the Ukrainian side of the river, where people are worried about running out of water due to the reservoir no longer having fresh water to give them. Ukrainian authorities are saying not to panic, that there will be water on and off throughout the next few days, because the reservoir levels are dropping drastically as that water flows down towards the Black Sea. It's a massive amount of water, and it's not clear yet how long it will take to clear this up.
Stuart, thank you very much. Our correspondent Stuart Smith in Moscow. Well, the destruction of the Nova Kakhovka Dam has taken centre stage at the meeting between NATO's Secretary-General and the leaders of the Bucharest 9 countries in Slovakia. Our correspondent Alex Cadier is in Brussels. So, Alex, leaders there condemning what's happened.
Yeah, Robin, strong condemnation from these leaders meeting in Bratislava, the Slovak capital. Today, the Bucharest 9 are those 9 countries that form the eastern front of the European Union and of NATO, a format has become increasingly significant and important in the last few months since the start of the invasion of Ukraine. The host, the Prime Minister of Slovakia, Ľudovít Odor, saying that the destruction of the Kakhovka Dam threatens thousands of people and clearly qualifies as a war crime. Now, that's something we've seen repeated by European authorities, but also the Czech Prime Minister Petr Fiala saying the attack on the dam caused a humanitarian disaster which will affect thousands of innocent people. Russian aggression in Ukraine is inexcusable and must be stopped. That's the Czech Prime Minister. Now, Kaja Kallas, she's the Estonian Prime Minister, an even stronger condemnation from her, saying that the terrorist state Russia has now turned water into a weapon. Destroying the dam is a war crime affecting countless of civilians and bringing ecocide and mass destruction. That's Kaja Kallas, the Estonian Prime Minister. So extremely strong condemnation by these leaders at the meeting of the Bucharest 9. Also on the agenda was a conversation, or at least a call, by the Polish Prime Minister Duda, or President I should say, for an increase in defence spending for these eastern flank countries of NATO and of the European Union. So really a bigger picture question there, and that link with NATO was symbolised by the fact that Jens Stoltenberg, the Secretary General, was there meeting with these leaders, also condemning the attack on Russia on the dam in Ukraine. Let's have a listen to what he had to say.
Russia has shattered peace in Europe. The destruction of the Kakhovka Dam today puts thousands of civilians at risk and causes severe environmental damage. This is an outrageous act which demonstrates once again the brutality of Russia's war in Ukraine.
So, Alex, what has the EU said about what's happened?
Well, equally strong condemnation from the European Union on this attack, on this matter, really going against Moscow's claims that this was in part due to Ukrainian shelling, very much aligning with what the Ukrainian government are saying. Josep Borrell, who is the EU's chief diplomat, High Representative for Foreign Affairs, saying the European Union condemns the attack in the strongest possible terms, and this attack represents a new dimension of Russian atrocities and may constitute a violation of international law, notably international humanitarian law. Very, very strong. But to give you again the bigger picture of what Europe's response might be, we heard from Charles Michel. He's the president of the European Council, the Council of 27 heads of state, and he said later this month, when the European Council of all 27 heads of state meet here in Brussels, he will raise the issue not just of this attack and condemning it, but also what the European Union can do to support those flooded areas. We've started to see videos on social media emerge of thousands of people being evacuated from flooded regions, so some level of reconstruction, some level of support will clearly be needed there. And Charles Michel, the president of the European Council, getting out ahead of that and trying to say, well, Europe will get together, will have conversations to find out what more support can be given specifically for those regions. Robin.
Alex Cadier in Brussels, thank you very much. Mark Cancian is a retired US Marine colonel and senior advisor at Washington's Center for Strategic and International Studies. I asked him about the significance of the Novokakhovka Dam.
My guess is that this is something that the Russians did, that they are trying to increase the barriers between them and the Ukrainians. They probably believe that the Ukrainian offensive has either begun or is about to begin, and they're doing this as a way to increase their protection.
Obviously, we don't know yet who is behind it, but why might someone want to target the dam?
Well, taking out dams as a way to increase water barriers is a classic defensive maneuver. The Germans, for example, did it many times in the Second World War, as other countries. So if the Russians were to have done this, this would follow a classic defensive pattern.
So what are the potential implications of this? Does this look like it could be a moment to signal an escalation?
Well, it clearly signals that the Russians are very worried, assuming that they were the ones who did it, and that they are willing to take severe, extreme measures to defend themselves.
And do we think that this could actually signal the start of Ukraine's counteroffensive?
Well, there's been a lot of talk in the last 24 hours or so about whether the Ukrainian counteroffensive has begun. There have been some at least local attacks. Whether the full offensive has begun, it's unclear. But if the Russians did this, it means that they believe that the offensive could be starting and that it could include a river crossing. The Ukrainians have developed some capabilities to cross the river, and it's not impossible that they would do that.
So what, if the counteroffensive has started, might we expect to see next?
Well, in the next couple of days, we'll see whether the Ukrainian counteroffensive has in fact begun. It would be very large. The Ukrainians have built 8 or 9 brigades, heavy brigades, to carry out this counteroffensive. So we would see a major attack, probably with artillery, certainly with combined arms. It will be unmistakable when it does begin.
So what do you think might be the potential long-term consequences of this dam being destroyed? How might it impact stability in the region?
Well, the long-term consequences for the region are severe. This is around the city of Kherson. There's been a lot of flooding. It's probably the greatest single damaging event in the war. Maybe on the scale of what's happened to Mariupol, which happened over a series of weeks in battles, because not only will the dam have to be rebuilt, but there are all those habitations downstream that will also have to be rebuilt. I think the good news, though, is that this is a local event. It's maybe for Americans, consider it like a hurricane. The damage around the area is quite severe, but the broader implications are relatively modest, fortunately.
The European Court of Human Rights has condemned Russia for failing to investigate the poisoning of Alexei Navalny in 2020. It found the Kremlin had violated the European Convention of Human Rights for refusing to open criminal proceedings. Russia voted to end the court's jurisdiction in 2022. A longtime Putin critic fell into a coma after being exposed to the nerve agent Novichok. Navalny has since been jailed on fraud charges he insists were trumped up. Iran claims it has created its first hypersonic missile. State television reported that the missile, called Fatah, or the Conqueror in Farsi, can travel at 15 times the speed of sound and has a range of up to 1,400 kilometres. It comes as tensions remain high with Western countries over Tehran's nuclear programme. You're watching CGTN. Still ahead. French protesters stage a 14th day of action against pension reforms. But is the movement running out of steam?
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and a bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans? Grey rhinos? And unicorn companies? Make sense of it all with Global Business, only on CGTN.
There's a new agenda for a new world, accelerating change in almost every part of our lives. It's shifting the norms of how we work, travel, and connect. How we think, interact, and develop. It's a new reality, a new agenda with me, Juliette Mann.
Welcome back. A reminder of our headlines. Ukraine declares a state of emergency and evacuates people from their homes as it accuses Russia of blowing up a major dam. An outrageous act of aggression. NATO's chief condemns the dam blast as he meets the alliance's eastern neighbours. Hundreds of thousands of demonstrators have taken to the streets across France in the 14th day of action against pension reforms. The protests could be a final attempt to pressure lawmakers to scrap the reform, which has seen the retirement age raised from 62 to 64. Opponents are hoping that a parliamentary review of the reforms, due later this week, will prompt rethink. Authorities say 11,000 police have been deployed, 4,000 of them in Paris. Well, our correspondent Nathalie Marras is in the French capital. So, Nathalie, we've seen fewer protesters amid a backlash against these reforms. What kind of support are we seeing today?
Still quite a sizable number of demonstrators that have joined these protests, that have heeded the union's calls to hit the streets today, but a significantly lower number than what we've seen in previous weeks. As you mentioned, this is the 14th day of demonstrations. Some of the protesters have also said the logistics of participating in these demonstrations week after week have been quite difficult, losing a day's wages to join the mass action. But we've heard from many that said they're not going to give up on this cause. In part, some of these demonstrators are raising their dissatisfaction and dissent towards the pension reforms, but also towards Emmanuel Macron's governance style. They believe that it's rather top-down, doesn't include the sentiments of the electorate, doesn't allow for much negotiation and consultation, and much of the tours of France that he's been conducting in recent weeks come a little too late, many have said.
So we're expected to see this bill in Parliament on Thursday to try and stop these pension reforms. Has it got any chance of succeeding?
A slim chance of success come Thursday, June 8th, with many of the protesters today, the union leaders that we've spoken to, have said they do tie their hopes on that review. In fact, there was just an announcement by some of the police officers that have lined the boulevards here in anticipation of the large crowd hitting this particular intersection in the next few minutes. But come June 8th, many of the union leaders and many of the protesters have said they hope that there will be some success, that at least in the lower courts they will pass this review. That then moves on to the Senate to deliberate on. Unfortunately, the senators have already made their call. We know that the pension reforms have already been signed into law, and there's little chance of the senators backtracking on that call. We know that the French government has said this is a necessary implementation to keep the pension system afloat and affordable, but many of the protesters say no matter what happens on Thursday, they're not loosening the reins on their dissatisfaction with the administration.
Nathalie, thank you very much. That's our correspondent, Nathalie Marras in Paris. India's Central Bureau of Investigation has taken over the probe into the cause of Friday's train crash that killed 288 people. 5 days on from the incident, nearly 100 bodies remain unclaimed. Our correspondent, Ravinder Bawa, reports from Odisha State.
Well, the government agencies are trying to explore all angles, whether it was human error or mechanical fault or sabotage that led to this deadliest rail crash in over 2 decades. On Tuesday, the officials of Central Bureau of Investigation arrived at the crash site to take over the investigations from the local police. The local police have filed a case with charges of causing death by negligence and endangering life in the train accident. The railway officials had earlier indicated tampering with the interlocking system that led to the accident. The federal agency stepping in is a significant move as to establish criminal tampering, if any, with the electronic interlocking system, or if the train changed tracks due to reconfiguration or a signaling error. In the meantime, the Commissioner of Railway Safety is collecting evidence in a 2-day inquiry from railway officials and witnesses. Everyone involved at the site have been asked to depose before him. Coming to the identification of the bodies, it still remains a challenge. Scenes of relatives of victims gathered at help desk of hospitals to identify the dead bodies are common. The family members are trying to identify their kin through photographs. Most of them say that they did not know that this was the last time they are seeing their loved ones alive.
Britain's Prince Harry has been giving evidence at London's High Court in a lawsuit against a tabloid publisher accused of phone hacking. Harry is one of more than 100 high-profile celebrities suing Mirror Group newspapers over alleged unlawful activities between 1991 and 2011. He told the court the vile behaviour of newspapers had been very damaging. A lawyer for the newspaper group says there's no evidence of phone hacking or any other unlawful activity on any occasion. Harry is the first senior royal to give evidence in court in 130 years. Brazil's President Lula da Silva has unveiled plans to end deforestation of the Amazon by 2030. They include recovering degraded forests and using intelligence and satellite imagery to track criminal activity. Lula also unveiled new measures to combat illegal mining, logging, hunting and fishing in the area. Protection of the Amazon was a major part of Lula's presidential election campaign last year. The Marshall Islands in the Pacific Ocean is one of the countries most at risk from climate change. The nation, which is a chain of volcanic islands, is already feeling the effects and it's being forced to adapt. Our correspondent Greg Navarro reports.
The highest point on the Marshall Islands, most populated island, is less than 3 meters above sea level. There are no mountains, and most of the islands are very narrow, just meters wide in some places. All of this makes the country extremely vulnerable to rising sea levels.
One of the islets has already been eroded to the point where it just looks like a sandbar. So because there was constant overwash, this islet that used to have trees, pandanus coconut trees, and they used to go camping, the family, who lived nearby it, now it just looks like a pile of rocks and sand. And that's the future that you can see for the rest of the Marshall Islands. It's not necessarily that we would be underwater, but that the island would become unlivable.
This lowline country is also at greater risk from drought, which threatens limited fresh water supplies, and from damaging weather extremes. In 2015, heavy winds combined with a massive storm surge to push the Pacific Ocean up over the shoreline and into this neighborhood, damaging roads, damaging homes, and destroying cemeteries.
And it all just flooded into the grave and broke some of the graves. And so what left after that was just skeletons and bones that came out.
Paul John watched the water surge through his neighborhood.
I saw the rock coming there, and I saw the house broke. Some house over there broke. The wave came and threw the rock, and then the all falling down.
When people hear us say these kinds of things, they'll say, well, you can just go inland, just build your buildings inland. There's only so far inland you can go before the island is done.
Kathy Jenner is a climate envoy working on the country's national adaptation plan.
That focus on adaptation, on changing our island so that we can stay in our island, that demonstrates the severity of the issue and the fact that it's getting worse.
That plan includes relocating communities where possible and reclaiming land from the sea.
It's a very interesting idea of, even when you do not have enough space or enough land, you can still creating a space to able to build infrastructures.
This sporting complex was built in the last year on land made from rocks in the sea. It now serves as a buffer to protect the neighboring community from future storm surges.
We're being forced to change our entire island, and The thing is for people to remember also is that Marshallese culture is very much tied to land. And so when you're changing that land, you're impacting that culture and that identity. And so this is something that we're being forced to do that we shouldn't have to be forced to do, but we're being very practical about it.
Jeranik Kajenet says the sea level here is expected to rise by 0.5 meter in the next 50 years, underscoring the need to adapt now before the impacts become too great to live with in the future. Greg Navarro, CGTN, Majuro.
China's Guangdong province is planning to build more offshore wind power than the entire world has ever built in just 1 year. The province has tendered for 23 plants. It comes as authorities there are testing the world's largest wind turbine at the country's first onshore test base for wind power. Our correspondent Cao Chufeng reports.
Behind me is the world's largest hybrid drive offshore wind turbine. It's currently being tested at a coastal test site here in Shantou. Once put into use, a single turbine will be able to provide electricity for tens of thousands of households.
The Shantou Power Supply Bureau has been responsible for power dispatch management during the wind turbine test. It is estimated that the turbine will be capable of generating approximately 40 million kilowatt hours of electricity annually, meeting the electricity demand of 20,000 households each year.
The hybrid drive wind turbine is the largest of its kind, both in terms of diameter and unit capacity. It reflects a growing trend, both in China and globally, towards developing wind turbines with higher single-unit capacities.
Having a larger capacity for each single machine under the same installed scale improves transportation and hoisting efficiency, reduces the usage of submarine cables and other materials, resulting in significant cost reduction. It also saves more sea area.
It is required by law to conduct tests on wind turbines before they are put into use. Currently, there are only a few online test bases in China that can accommodate wind turbines with large capacities. Experts believe that the recent open Guangdong Wind Power Coastal Test Base in Shantou will be able to accommodate the largest unit capacity turbine planned for development in China before 2025. And also eliminate the need to sell offshore for tests.
Traditionally, offshore wind turbines are tested at sea, which is costly and carries higher risks. The current international trend is to conduct tests on land. However, this approach requires a test site with specific criteria, starting with abundant wind resources. In the Haojiang district of Shantou, the wind speed can exceed 6 meters per second.
The wind power industry has been officially listed as one of the strategic emerging industries, as China aims to achieve its carbon neutrality goals by 2060. The country has also set a target for the total installed capacity of offshore wind power to reach 71 gigawatts by 2035. Cao Chufeng, CGTN, Shantou.
And that is The World Today. Thanks for watching. There's more news on CGTN Europe's channel on the Telegram app, or scan the QR code on the screen to get stories and updates sent direct to your phone. We're back with more news at the top of the hour. Coming up next, it's World Insight. For now, from all of the team in London, it's goodbye.